All right, Matthew, welcome to episode 61 of the Performance Advantage podcast with myself, Dr. Will O'Connor, and Dr. Matt Miller, sports scientist. This week on the show, we have Dr. Kim Hebert-Losier. She is a French-Canadian sports scientist based in Waikato University in New Zealand, and she's done a bunch of research on the Nike Vaporfly running shoes, aka the cheetah shoes that Matt says mechanical doping shoes. So we want to find out from her, like, if it is actually cheating, if they are making you faster. So we'll get into that after a quick recap of what Matt and I have been up to. As always, shout out to our sponsors, Endurance Training Hub and Smart MTB Training, online self-coaching software to help you become a better athlete in your chosen sport. And we've got live webinars coming up on those platforms with myself and Dr. Matt and some special guests. Make sure you check that out, sign up and get access to those webinars. Don't forget, we have our Performance Advantage Podcast Masterclass 6-part course available now on our website for you to sign up and get through that content to get your Masterclass certificate in utilizing sports science to train more effectively. All right, Matt, it's only been a week. Have you been up to much?
Let's see. Let me think back. Last week, what did I do? I don't even know what I had for breakfast, actually. But let's see. What did I do last week? I actually thought I needed a bit of a recovery week, so I kind of laid low most of the week and just work. And then on the weekend, did a big ride, got pretty smashed, and then big hike. So that was pretty fun.
When you say you got pretty smashed, you don't mean it in the Kiwi term of like getting on the beers until about 2 a.m.?
No, it means I did an endurance ride with Caleb and was pretty much holding on for dear life for 3 hours. So yeah, I was pretty tired from that. But it's pretty good to go explore in the rain, hit some gravel, and we were out there. So that was pretty good.
Yeah, as a bit of a backing, Matt coaches this pro junior elite rider, mountain bike rider for New Zealand, and he's been coaching him since maybe the age of 15, 16. We had him on the podcast, Caleb Botcher, and now he's about 18, 19. Matt goes out for a long endurance ride with him, and he's like, man, I just can't do it anymore, Will. I can't hang with him. I was pretty much tempo for about 3 hours.
Yeah, So I was telling this to Will in confidence, but it's true. Like we used to be able to do endurance rides. Yeah, quite easy, 4 or 5 whatever hours, and but I just can't hang. I haven't gotten like really slower, but like I can see his power and his heart rate. And I was like, wow, he wasn't even trying. I was definitely at the limit. So the last hour or so, I was just drafting him, going 35 Ks, and he's lower zone 2. So yeah, it's tough when someone gets so fast. They're pretty limited with who they can ride with and still get a good workout, which that's where it gets kind of starts to get lonely at the top, because when you're doing a 6-hour ride and no one can hang with you, that's when things start to get tough. But it's good to see that progress over the last 4 or 5 years. And now I'm just sore.
It's one of those important things as well where like you love your data. Right, you know what you're looking at, and you can also access his. So, so you can go, oh yeah, he must have been pushing. Nope, no, he wasn't.
No,
but a lot of people, like we've all got training partners or training groups, group rides, bunch rides, group runs. There's always that, there's that one Caleb in the bunch in the group who's cruising but also pushing the pace, and everyone else is swinging, like struggling to hold on, but thinking everyone else is kind of working at that same rate. And so you generally will have like 1 or 2 people getting a solid endurance workout and other people just absolutely thrashing themselves like you.
Yeah, and then if you're not totally sure what you're doing with your training, that's when you end up thinking that everyone's thrashing themselves. So you thrash yourself then every single session. That's when things get bad for you, right? And that's the Steve that we talked about when we did our podcast on designing a training plan. And that's a pretty classic move.
Oh yeah, man. I like when I first got into triathlon, I just wanted to go. If someone was like, "Oh, will you want to join me for this workout?" You're like, "Well, that's how you get fast, so sure." And then you join 7 different people on 7 days of the week.
Yeah.
You don't get faster.
No,
They do.
No. Yeah. That's not to say though that it's not good to train with someone better than you, but you should do it on select days and not all the time. But you can learn a lot from someone better than you, for sure.
Yeah, and Matt, speaking of like monitoring your training and loving data, I just bought a new lactate meter, so I'm quite excited about it.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that's not a normal thing that people just have, is a blood lactate analyzer.
Yeah, but I bought it for a couple reasons. Like one for my just personal interest, make sure I'm training effectively, and also for that athletes that I work with offer it as a service, like lactate testing. More so for myself, definitely. just just an excuse to buy one, really, because it's somewhat related to my job. But so I went down to lactate curve test, threshold test yesterday, Matt. Went down to the athletics track, did a bunch of I just did 1,200 meters, 3 laps of the track at varying speed, increasing speeds. Found my threshold around 330, so I'm just about to put a video up, so check that out for more info on that. But I'm stoked that now I can start to really dial in what threshold is, Matt, because if I said threshold or tempo, man, how wide is that range and interpretation to different people?
Yeah. I've been scrolling through the forums actually with some other people talking about those same things. I'm like, oh man, you guys need to check out the our masterclass, or at least our Training Zones podcast episode. But it's pretty funny. There's a lot of maybe misunderstandings in there, but it's good that you can finally get that data, and you'll be able to do that with your clients as well, which would be really cool.
Yeah. So the main reason I got one for myself was to actually figure out when you have threshold. Maybe that's next week or the week after, Matt. We'll just talk about lactate and how it's not the villain of slowing you down.
Your
what you
friend,
can do, your friend lactate. When you know what's happening, when you know that kind of exact point or pace where it's lactate's accumulating, you start you're anaerobic. You have an issue. You're on borrowed time. And I've got a marathon coming up as well as a 24-hour race. But the marathon, more importantly, you're really flirting with that line for 2.5 hours. And so I need to find that line at which I'm just below and able to keep running without burning any matches. And so try and apply that to training. But anyway, Matt, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, cool. Sweet. So we have Kim on, and you contacted Kim. I know Kim was doing I think she's doing some research in mountain biking, and you wanted to get her on because she's been researching these biomechanical doping Nike Vaporfly shoes.
Yeah. So, however it came across my desk was her paper, which is a preprint. So preprint means it just hasn't been published, hasn't been through the full peer review process, which to most people doesn't really actually mean anything because the research has been done. And it's titled Evidence of Variable Performance Responses to the Nike 4% Shoe. Definitely not a game changer for all recreational runners. Mm. When I saw this and saw that she was in Waikato, just up the road in Tauranga, I was like, we should get her on the show, have a chat, figure this out, see if Matt's just scaremongering or are you just jealous that people have these shoes and potentially running faster than them? It was cynic of technology. So anyway, and Dr. Kim Hebert-Losier is she's an applied biomechanist and senior lecturer at at University of Waikato, and she's a Canadian from Montreal, did a PhD in New Zealand in like calf muscle activation and fatigue, and she has the calf raise app, which is pretty cool. She created an app. Matt, you didn't talk to her about creating apps, but there probably could have been a good discussion. And man, she has been around. Like, she worked at the High Performance Sports Center at the Swedish Research Institute, Nebraska Athletics Performance Laboratory, Institute of Malaysia as a senior biomechanist and researcher, and now works at Waikato Uni in the Adams Centre for High Performance, which is one of New Zealand's top high performance centres. And she's a reasonably accomplished runner herself, and to have someone of that caliber, and a level of understanding of biomechanics. Well, I'm definitely no expert, as you'll hear. Like, I thought everyone was heel strikers. I mean, 4-foot strikers, but I got schooled.
No, this is cool. This is why it's awesome to get experts on to talk about these things. And Kim was really open to talk about like her research and what they did as part of the study, and it's very cool. So I think there are a lot of people interested in these shoes, and I think everyone's going to be really interested in our talk with Kim.
Yeah. All right. We'll put it on. All right, Kim, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on. So Matt calls these shoes cheetah shoes.
Yeah, and mechanical doping.
Fair enough.
And your paper, I guess, it showed that and it didn't show that. The big takeaway from me was like, oh yeah. So when we're looking at, in this case, the Vaporflies, Nike Vaporfly 4%. There was a definite statistical improvement in like running economy slightly, but then a 3K time trial, and time trial is really what we're interested in. There was an improvement. So that's, yeah. So what are your opinions before we get into like the science side of things? What do you think about these shoes? You're a runner. Do you wear them?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's great to be on the podcast with you guys. And no, I don't wear the Vaporfly shoes. I'm actually on the other end of the spectrum, so I've transitioned into a more minimal shoe myself personally, and that's a choice, and that was off the backing of evidence that wearing lighter shoes will improve performance, and as well as yeah, it's kind of a good feel and good for calf muscle strength, and I kind of have a thing for calf muscles. My PhD was on calf muscle, so it kind of goes around. And yeah, I mean, and to come back to your question, whether or not I do think that they improve performance. If you look at the evidence, it's kind of hard not to say that they improve performance. But what was novel about our paper that we did here was it does, but there are individual responders that you have to, consider, and not everybody actually responded favorably to the like 4% shoe, I guess. So
well, there you go. Well, like maybe you should be careful with these shoes. But now that you have your new lactate meter, you could do some time trials and measure your lactate.
Yeah,
made some running economy, couldn't you?
Well, I'm definitely going to be doing that, Kim. I've just bought a lactate meter for personal private use, as you do,
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm pretty excited to test some of this stuff out, because as we'll kind of work our way through your paper, I guess, to so we don't jump all over the show, because I know like lower lactate levels, you did show that, but so like I guess if we get into the study, what did you want to achieve by doing this?
Yeah, so I mean, the main thing is that all of the research that came out on the Vaporfly was all in elite runners or highly trained runners. And really, if you take a step back from that, Nike's biggest market is not necessarily the elite runner. There's a whole lot more recreational people, on the planet that there is elite runners. And as you would know, I don't know if you have a Nike 4% shoe. I have a few spare pairs from my trial if you want to give them a go. Yeah.
I'll travel up the road for that.
Yeah, sure. It's not that far actually. You can ride your bike maybe.
You could run there.
Yeah. And you might run 4% faster if you put the Nike Vaporfly. But yeah, no. So I mean, I guess that the main drive was to actually see if in your more day-to-day runners, if it did actually improve performance in that population group. For us, it was also really important that we weren't sponsored by any shoe company or Nike, because some of the first papers that did come out were sponsored by Nike. And come what may, there might be some bias within that. I'm not saying there was, because the researchers, the research are well known, and I don't think there would have been bias, but you still have to kind of take that bias away. So we actually purchased the shoes as soon as they became available for public sale, because the study was conducted, the trials we started almost a year ago. And then, collecting data from 18 runners on 4 different occasions is quite a massive study, actually. But yeah, so I mean, that was kind of the impetus for this, was to, kind of have an independent research more to inform, you and me, as opposed to, Eliud Kipchoge, who has his own, sports science team.
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty interesting about your group that you used, because we see that like in all kinds of sports equipment. It's all made for the pros. And then everyone's like, oh, well, if the pros use it, then obviously that's what I need, because it costs more or looks better, or, it's said to work better. So, but pros are like a great marketing tool, aren't they, for a company to sell things? But maybe it's not the best thing for us all the time.
No, for sure. And I mean, for $400 a pair of shoes, which was the price that we bought them, that's still quite a considerable investment. If you're going to invest, well, does it actually work? And, that's kind of like the question that we wanted to look into. So
yeah, you had a bunch of runners, and you tested the 4%ers, but then you'd need to test other shoes, right? These people in other shoes. So what kind of shoes and things did you compare them to?
Yeah, so I guess we wanted to compare it with something that we quote unquote knew was going to work, which is where we went with the racing flats. So, up until the Nike Vaporfly, the most consistent evidence of, what type of running shoe would improve performance was the lighter the shoe, the better for running economy, right? Because if you take weight away from the shoe, you have less mass to carry around, so it costs less oxygen to run, basically. So that was our other shoe. But I guess from another perspective, what was novel, but at the same time you have a little bit less control, is that we wanted to compare it to what people were used to wearing in. Because the assumption there would be, in a running community, if you train in a certain shoe, you get used to wearing that shoe, right? And it's kind of like the mechanical loading principle, or motor learning patterning, is that you get used to your shoe and you develop strength basically in that shoe, right? Which is why people struggle if they go from a traditional shoe to wearing a minimalist shoe, is because their calf muscle, the load goes to their calf muscle, it goes to their feet, and then they have stress fractures or injuries because they're not used to the loading in those particular structures. So our thought was, okay, well, let's actually compare it as well to what people are used to wearing. And our assumption would be that people who were used to wearing shoes that were perhaps more comparable to the Nike Vaporfly might respond better, for instance, to a Nike Vaporfly, or if runners were more used to wearing lightweight shoes, then they might actually respond better to wearing the lightweight shoe. So that was our kind of baseline assumption, and that was our 3 different shoe conditions that we looked into. So individuals' own running shoes, the Nike Vaporfly, and a Saucony flat endorphin racer, so more of a racing flat lightweight shoe.
So you had them running at 3 different intensities as kind of like your fixed comparable measure, right? Across
Correct.
the board, I think it was like 60, 70, 80% of VO2 max.
Yep.
And then after that, there was an 3K time trial, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a pretty demanding protocol to do that about 4 times.
Yeah, so the first session was baseline. So the first session is where we established their VO2 max, so their VO2 peak, which would then help us set that 60, 70, and 80% of their speed at VO2 max, basically. And during that initial trial, we also did familiarization with the running shoes to make sure that, we bought 4 different sizes. And that's more of a budget consideration as well. So, we had to make sure that the runners were comfortable in those shoes. And we also got their perceptions in terms of how comfortable they felt those shoes were as well. And then in sessions 2, 3, and 4, that's when they did, like you mentioned, the running economy test. Then they had a break, and then they did a 3K time trial on the treadmill. So all of this was treadmill based.
Cool. Out of curiosity, did you ask them how cool they thought the shoes were? And, maybe if that factored in, because they look cool, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we kind of tried to reduce that effect by so we actually spray painted the shoes black. So previously
That makes them even cooler.
Yeah, well, we think so, the camouflaged Vaporflies. So in an attempt to try to reduce, the perception effect, or how they if they knew we were testing the Nike Vaporfly, they might think, oh yeah, I'll run faster. So to try to minimize that, we spray painted the shoes black. And in the scientific community, we actually got a lot of backlash almost from the scientific community saying,
reviewer 2.
Yeah, no, this was reviewer 1, 2, and 3.
There we go.
And I won't say anything because I won't be biased, but they tended to be from a certain country as well, and they say, that they all thought that was funny, that we couldn't actually blind people from knowing that was like Vaporflies. But at the end of the experimental trial, you have to remember, this was when the shoes first came out. So this was before Eliud Kipchoge actually broke the 2 hours. And little New Zealand is a little bit kind of remote. I think people forget that we're a little bit remote from the rest of the world. And there was only one of our participants, when we asked at the end of the trials, do you know what shoes we're testing, that they knew there was the Nike Vaporfly. So we had just told them we were testing two different types of shoes, and we wanted to find out what was better for performance for them. And at the end we said, do you know what shoes you were running in? And there was only one person that actually knew. So
well, being based in New Zealand, I would think that everyone thought it was the Nike Freeze. I see pretty much everyone wearing the Nike Free shoes everywhere. I don't know if it's just me, but black and white, and I see them everywhere.
Yeah.
From my perspective within the running community, it wasn't until they brought out Eliud Kipchoge broke 2 hours. They had both the next percent and the Alpha Fly, where people were like, oh, okay, these shoes are faster. Before that, it was kind of like Nike are doing something with cushion and maybe it's faster, but I'm not spending $400. Exactly. That was just the general. And then if you trickle down to less competitive runners, you got less knowledge base. So and then when you spray paint them black, I'm sure there's a lot of people not really sure what's going on.
So on that, what is actually going on in these shoes? So what's actually the thing that is making these changes in people's running?
Yeah, so I mean, have you guys ever tried these shoes on?
So I've got 2 pairs of Zoom Flies.
Yep.
Yeah, so I've got the original Zoom Fly and the Zoom Fly 3. That's okay. That's probably quite simple. So the Zoom Fly 3 came out after the Vaporfly, and sets. So it's carbon plated. It doesn't have Zoom X foam though.
Yeah.
You guys are speaking another language to me. So basically, when I think of these shoes, I think biomechanical doping, cheater shoes. I have lots of different names like that for them. And I'm just imagining this carbon fiber leaf spring inside the shoe, kind of like what Oscar Pistorius is running on.
Sure. So that's where a lot of people think that the benefits come from is from the carbon fiber plate, but actually most of the benefit comes from the cushioning. So the P-bax zoom, or however they call it, the cushioning within the shoe. But the cushioning probably wouldn't work on its own. So by having that additional kind of carbon fiber plate, it's the mix between, how much energy return the cushioning gives you, and the carbon fiber plates allows that basically the shoe not to degrade to a certain extent, which again, there's a little bit of debate out there is how long these shoes actually last. So that would be an interesting study that I think is actually going on internationally, is that, if you actually wear these shoes for a period of time, how long do the energy return properties maintain within the shoe. So to come back to your original question, it's actually the combination of the cushioning with the carbon fiber plates that assist in the energy return. Most of the energy return actually comes from the foam, so not necessarily the carbon fiber plate. But if you didn't have the carbon fiber plate, then the foam wouldn't work the way it does.
It'd kind of be like a pillow.
Yeah.
Well, because you used two terms that I thought were really good: compliance and resilience. In terms of like relating to, I guess, the cushioning system of the shoe, or the shoe as a whole. Because what we hear in like running terminology, I guess, is like responsiveness. And
yes.
And I think it's a really bad term because it's too vague. Because you can have a responsive shoe that's really cushioned, but it's a bit responsive. But then you can have a really firm shoe with a carbon plate, and that's going to be really responsive as well, but in a different way. Like not a responsive cushion, like a responsive propulsion. And so, you had compliance and resilience. So that was kind of like the energy return as well as the cushioning system.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. I thought that was. Would you be able to explain that a bit more?
Yeah. So compliance would just be more like the ability to, say, deform. Yeah. So something that's compliance. If you come back to your cushioning analogy, something that is more compliant will compress more. Yeah. Whereas something that is more resilient will actually return you more energy. Yeah. So then the shoe kind of has a combination of both of these features, is that, yes, there is some compliance or some compression happening, but the amount of energy return is much higher than any of comparable marathon, racing shoes, basically. So up to 87% of the energy that's stored within the shoe or within that foam is actually returned.
Okay, so I guess to put this into like a really simple to understand terms, I saw this this video that Evan from Stride put on Instagram, and he had the shoes and he threw them onto the ground, and it bounced back into his hand. So that's kind of the thing that you're talking about right there. It's storing and returning like most of the energy, and that's why it's able to bounce back.
Yeah, it's kind of like a spring, basically, or an elastic band. You have elastic bands that you can stretch a lot, but then they don't actually, fling back or return. You wouldn't, if you were using it as a slingshot, the ball wouldn't go very, very far. Whereas, you can have one that is more, resilient, and then will actually return a lot more of that energy that you've pulled into that elastic band.
Yeah, that the last of that resilience study would be super interesting, because that is the big question, right? Like, how long do they last?
There's some evidence around, Twitter, some people complaining. I mean, there was one researcher that bought a pair in Australia, and he took it out for one run, and the shoe was already degrading, and he posted that on Twitter, and he was quite, angry about it. But then there's other people that say, I've been wearing them for 800K and they're still fine. So I don't know if it's just the different running mechanics and the stresses that they put on the shoes that are different, or and the reality is we just don't know. So if you're an elite athlete and you get a new pair every time you run a marathon, then you're sweet. But if you're a recreational runner, then there's also that component in terms of the risk reward as well, because these shoes are fundamentally, they change the way you run. Yeah, and they actually change. And from a biomechanical perspective, it's really interesting because, typically running economy is associated with a reduced vertical displacement.
Yeah.
Okay, so people who are the up and down movement, exactly. So people who are more economical bounce less up and down. And I often make the analogy, if you're running, you want to be moving forward, you don't want to be moving up and down. Yeah, you don't want to be wasting energy. Whereas these shoes, they actually increase that up and down movement. They make you more economical, but you're bouncing more. So they're actually changing the fundamental biomechanical laws or principles that we've kind of been, investigating, or that we know in running is associated with running economy. So I find that really fascinating in terms of how it's fundamentally changing the way people run, and what those links, the biomechanical links between running and running economy.
Yeah, so if we go then into your more like the results.
Yeah, sure.
So you have your own shoes. You've come in, you've done the test. You've got these racing flats. As a traditional racing flat, anyone understands it's as light as possible. And then you've got the new like super shoe, pretty much.
Yeah.
And what did you find?
Yeah, so actually, I'll be completely honest. To my surprise, when I first ran the analysis, I was like, "Oh, I found an average 4.2% improvement in running economy." and to be completely honest, I was like, "Oh wow, okay." I replicated someone, and that's when that the results are there. Is when someone can reproduce the same results as another person's lab, right? So I was fundamentally surprised, to be completely honest. But then when you started, like I said, when you start to look a little bit more into the data, some people responded very positively, but we also saw some people in the Nike Vaporfly didn't do so well. Yeah. So on average, yes, the Nike 4% shoe improved running economy by around 4%. But what we also found was that the racing flats also improve running economy.
Yes.
So in essence, your own shoes suck. Yeah.
Yeah.
that was kind of like the tagline that we put in our Twitter post. Was which was a little bit counterintuitive, was that what people are used to wearing, they actually perform the worst in. Yeah, so we can talk about why that could be. Obviously, we didn't control for the amount of wear in these shoes. That there's certain things that you can't control. Some people came in and the Nike shoe, for example, weighs around 210 grams. Some people had shoes that weighed as much as 380 grams. That's a huge difference. Yeah. But that's what they were used to wearing. So is it just because they were new shoes and that they perform better, or they knew they were experimental shoes? Because then maybe there was that placebo effect that obviously we can't control for. Both of the shoes were spray painted black, but they were both new shoes compared to what people were used to wearing. But fundamentally, own shoes was the worst condition. So flat improved running economy, and Nike improved running economy. Nike improved running economy the most. Statistically speaking, if you compare the Nike and the flat, there was no difference in running economy between the two. But if you looked at the percent values, then yes. If I told you, okay, well, this will make you 4% better and this will make you 3% better, what shoes would you more likely be inclined to go with?
Sorry, can we unpack this this running economy measurement here? So
Sure.
I know, like, before we started, Kim, you're like, I don't want to talk about running economy too much. Because you don't think of yourself as a physiologist, and that's okay. Because I think running economy is a super important aspect of biomechanics as well.
Sure.
And I guess like the reasons why you're seeing some of these differences is partially because of the mass of the shoes. So like the flats are really light, so you might expect it to be easier to run.
Correct.
When the shoes are light, so more economical.
Yeah.
And then the Nike shoes are returning a lot of that energy, so maybe that could be contributing to that economy. But what exactly is running economy?
Yeah, so I mean, running economy is a little bit like your car, right? If you have an economical car, you use a certain amount of fuel, right, to travel a certain distance. If you're more economical, you use less amount of fuel to cover that same distance, or for the same amount of fuel, you can travel further or cover the same distance faster. If we transpose that analogy to running, then it's the same principle. If you're looking at oxygen consumption, so how much oxygen you use to run at a given speed, which is fundamentally what we've done here, is that we looked at a consistent speed within individuals, and we looked at how much oxygen they were consuming to travel at that certain speed. So if you were more economical, then you would use less oxygen for your body mass to travel at that certain speed.
Cool. So normally, like, that running economy is direct, or that the oxygen used is directly proportional to the amount of work you're doing. So you go faster, you use more oxygen. Yeah. But then what you guys are probably doing is controlling the speed. I think you tested a few different speeds. So then the only difference there is the shoes, and that's where the mass comes in, right? So with a lighter shoe, you would be doing less work, right? So that should improve your running economy?
Yeah, sure. In a very, very simplistic form, yes. But this basically the amount of your body mass as individual. I think on average, I would have to check the paper, but let's say it was a typical male running person that maybe 75 kg mass. We're talking about 200 grams difference at the shoe. That's not going to make a huge amount of difference for the overall body mass, but it's just how much they actually have to carry distally, which is the main thing that you have to lift, I guess, when you're running is your feet. Yeah, so that's why it has a potential to make an influence on your running economy.
Cool.
Yeah, right. I see. So it's like, I never really thought about that, but because I always have a complaint about these new aerodynamic bikes. And I'm like, well, the bike makes up 15 to 20% of aerodynamics. Like, you still got to put a human on it. It's kind of the same thing with a shoe. Like, you can have this really heavy shoe, quote unquote heavy, but then you stick an 80 kg individual in them and it becomes negligible. So one of the ways you're able to correlate kind of the economy or economic improvements in the running and with the shoes and everything, you did a time trial. And that's kind of like the best way. Like, well, cool, you've got all this data. That's interesting for us as scientists to be like, oh yeah, oxygen consumption, lactate, biomechanics, but are you going to be faster? Yeah. So like, what came out in the time trial?
Yeah, so that was our main reason for doing a time trial, is most of the research had been on, running economy, or then Strava data showing, people were improving, out in the field, if you want. Now, whether or not that's good data to be using is a different story. But yeah, which is why we did a 3K time trial. Yeah, Matt, you got something to say? Or
I think it's funny because we talk about like how bad Strava is all the time on the podcast, and like how inaccurate it is. So it's nice to hear.
So just as an aside on that study, it was an odd one, I thought, really, where this researcher pretty much just, because on Strava you can list your shoe, right?
Sure.
So, and then he collected, I think it was it 10K and half marathon times?
It was half marathon and marathon times, yeah.
Half marathon times, and then looked at the shoe and the different shoes and tried to
basically analyze a big data set to see what the effect of shoe was. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And then found that the shoe weight, right? And you probably know this paper a lot better than I do, but I just thought I'd give it in case some of our listeners might want to read it, check it out. Like, I'll link to it. But
so it was a paper by Quealy and Al that and by paper, it was a journal article published in the New York Times. Yeah, so wasn't necessarily a peer-reviewed scientific article. It's a New York Times journal article that came out and compared the Vaporfly and the Next Percent, and did exactly what you said. So they looked at people's race results, and they looked at, whether they were switchers, so whether they switched to the Nike Vaporfly or the Next Percent, and they showed that people who switched to those shoes were 73% likely to set a PB, and that average improvement was around 4 and 5%, compared if they switched to some other shoe or compared if they kept their own shoe. take what you want from that, but that's what they showed. Yeah.
But then you did show in yours that your own shoes suck. So definitely just switch. Just whatever shoes, Matt, you're going to do for your next running race, just switch them.
I've already ordered them. I ordered them as we're talking about it, and I haven't run in weeks. But that's funny because Strava still thinks I'm using like the same mountain bike on all my road rides from 5 years ago. And I'm not, right?
No, there you go.
Like all that's funny, but that I think that's okay for the New York Times, and Strava collects their own data and they do their own reports.
Sure,
that are, okay, I guess.
Yeah. Anyway, the 3K time.
Yeah, the 3K. So
how'd you go? What'd you find?
Yeah, so we did find that the Nike improved the 3K time trial by an average of 2.8%. So the running economy improvement was 4%. The race or the time trial improvement was around 2.8%, which agrees with the scientific evidence on just because you improve in running economy by 4%, that doesn't that doesn't equate to 4% improvement in a race results. Okay, so people sometimes kind of put those two together. They're related. But the percentage improvement is not the same because you're running at a different intensity. Yeah. So when you're running a time trial, obviously you're running at a much higher intensity than at 60, 70, or 80% of your VO2 max, and for a longer period. So, so we did find that in the time trial, the Nike actually outperformed both the racing flat as well as their own shoe.
Right.
So. Yeah, which was interesting, and we made some speculation as to why that could be in the paper, including the fact that the difference between what people were actually wearing, which typically if you run in an A6 or a Brooks Glycerine, or most people wear the more traditional type running shoes. And what I mean by more traditional type running shoes is that there's a certain heel height, there's a certain heel to toe drop, and there's a certain amount of cushioning in the shoe. Now, going from that typical shoe to a flat shoe that has, zero cushioning, zero heel height, no heel to toe drop is much different than going from your traditional shoe to the Nike Vaporfly. Yeah,
big time. Especially like you're saying, if you're doing whatever, 3 to 5 minutes at a sub-maximal intensity, it's all right. You might settle into it. But you're doing a 3K all-out time trial, and then like you're saying, with the calf loading, foot mechanics, like that, I'm sure must impact running economy and therefore time.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why we designed our study the way we did, is because I'm actually a physiotherapist from training. I'm a registered physiotherapist in New Zealand, and some of my co-authors are physiotherapists as well. / biomechanics, and then we were concerned that if we actually did a longer time trial, so initially we had talked about doing a 5K time trial, which would be more in resemble what people do in park runs, or what a typical distance that you would see in a recreational race. But we were actually concerned of the novelty of the shoes and the amount of loading that people would do if we asked them to do 3 time trials in a week apart, 5K. So that's why we reduced it to kind of like a 3K time trial. And previous studies had also looked at that distance in a research context. So we thought, for the well-being of our participants, we'll do a 3K instead of a 5K.
It's a very classic physio move.
Yeah.
Make sure you're progressive loading, and I would have been like, I think we could probably do half full marathons.
Yeah. No. The good news is that we didn't have any people come back with injuries in our 18 runners, so that was good. Good move.
I was kind of wondering that when we're talking about a shoe that returns so much energy. So there's already so much loading when we're running. And a lot of it's due to the braking force and the other forces of, a moving body, because there's so much mass and you're moving very quickly. So if that shoe is able to return the energy, it's returning that energy back into the person, isn't it?
Yeah, into the person, or that's just less energy that they need to expend. Yeah, so they get energy savings, I guess, and then they can tap into, a little bit later, which I know it sounds like Will here in particular is a, lactate fan. But, that was one of the things we did see, was that at the higher, kind of running intensities, there was a lower accumulation of lactate in the Nike Vaporfly. Okay, now we know, obviously lactate is not necessarily a byproduct. It can be used as a fuel source. But, if you're able to shift that curve, then, you would theoretically be able to perform at for a longer period of time, before reaching fatigue. So.
Okay. So as a physio, though, you're not concerned about this extra increased energy being returned to the person, and you think that, long term, if someone's wearing these shoes and dealing with this added energy being stored and returned back, that's not going to affect the mechanics of the person at all?
No, I wouldn't say that energy is returned to the person per se. I mean, it's kind of to this return to the system, if you want, like the runner shoe system, if you take that as a whole from a biomechanical perspective. What I would be more concerned about as a physio is the fact that, as I mentioned previously, they're kind of changing their biomechanical patterns and running in these shoes. So I tried them on, even though they were too big for me because they were men's size, but I figured I'd give it a go. And it really feels like you're almost bouncing, like it's propelling you. It's a really, really odd, like, running sensation. And some of our participants did comment on that as well, and that it was a style of running, or a sensation that they weren't used to. And it's more the changing of those person biomechanics, and where those loadings might shift to, that I would be more concerned about in terms of a physiotherapist, is that it's just completely changing the pattern or the way that a person runs. So, so it's almost like if you go to do a workout in the gym and you're doing a new movement, well, you might have DOMs, right? And people kind of think, oh yeah, okay, I did 10, I did 3 sets of 10 reps. So, you lifted 30 times. But if you go a run, every minute that you run, the average person will take 160 steps per minute. Okay, on one leg, that's 90 impacts, right? So that's if you're loading 90 times, but, most people will go out maybe for 20 minutes, half an hour, an hour, add those impacts in a completely new movement pattern, then your structures aren't used to getting that type of impact. Yeah. If I told you, okay, well, go to the gym and do, 1,000 reps, you'll be like, oh, you're crazy. But yet people won't think twice to go running, for 30 minutes in a new pair of shoe that completely changes their biomechanics.
You got the results, and it's kind of, I guess, as reported, right? The Vaporfly, more economical, and ended up being faster. Probably, like, good to get the information that they're more economical, and so is the racing flat, but then they improved time across the board. So then, what are you saying this is due to? And I'd like to get, this is like the discussion, right, where when we're not peer reviewing your paper, so you're open to more interpretation of your data, because some of the things that I pulled out of your paper were around, like, rear foot, like heel strikers versus midfoot, forefoot, and also the variation in the responsiveness, like, of individuals to those papers, to the shoes. So that's kind of like, that's the interesting part, right? Where you're like, yeah, look, if we take an average of all of these people, there's an improvement. But you could be someone who's like, really getting a lot of improvement out of these shoes, or you're someone who's pretty much just wasting $400.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and that was something that we kind of wanted to make clear in our paper, and that's why we showed the individual variations between the different shoes as well, and didn't just report the average and standard deviation. So to come back to your point, there was around 60% of the people that the running economy got better when they wore the Vaporfly. But that also means there's 40% of people that either didn't change much or they got worse when they wore the Vaporfly. And some of them got a lot worse, like almost 10% worse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Exactly. So, and to, like you say, to say, oh, well, I'll put in $400 and, I'll get a lot worse. Well, that's not
no one
ideal,
wants to
is
buy
it?
the Nike negative 10%.
No, exactly. And there was some so in the previous Vaporfly studies, it had been highlighted that the midfoot, forefoot people, so basically the non-rear foot strikers, tended to respond less favorably. So we did look at within our population. So we had 4 of the 18 runners who were non-rear foot strikers. So they were either hitting the ground with a midfoot or a forefoot. And out of those 4, if I remember correctly, only one of them got better with the Nike Vaporfly. So there did seem to be an effect of whether you were forefoot or rear foot striker. If you're typically a forefoot or midfoot striker, you are potentially less likely to respond favorably to the Nike Vaporfly.
Yeah, I
was
found
one of the things that we saw.
really fascinating because they're developed around the elite runners.
Sure.
50 kg Kenyan runners, and they're all mid forefoot strikers, and not all, but majority. If you look at them, and you're probably going to pull me up on that now.
Yeah, I was going to say that's debatable. There was a recent paper by Hanley and colleagues, I think it came out in 2019, looking at the World Athletics half marathon and marathon races.
Oh, I did. Yeah.
And, I think it was almost 50% were rear foot strikers. So yes, there's a greater proportion of non-rear foot strikers and elite runners, but they're not all forefoot runners. That's a misconception. And actually, I've now you got me thinking. Oh, how does Eliud Kipchoge run? Because I think I recall that he runs rear foot, but I might be mistaken.
Well, I guess the difference really is the overstriding or braking force of the rear foot strike compared to like more natural, like under your center of mass. Like I don't really know the biomechanical terms, sorry, but you know how there's bad rear foot striking and then there's like efficient rear foot striking.
Sure.
Yeah, I found that really because the shoes, all the grip and everything is applied, and even the newest ones, which have the ear pockets, are all forefoot. It all kind of is pushing that technology, or at least looks like, with the roll system, the rocker kind of thing that they've got on it to push you to the forefoot.
Yep. But again, I can't talk about the Alpha Flies. But the Vaporflies that we tested, if you look at the construction of the shoe, it is slightly curved in the back and slightly curved in the front.
Yeah.
And actually the sole is pretty slick. There's actually not much grip on it per se. It's actually quite a smooth surface. And I mean, it's hard as you try to bend this shoe and you can't because of the carbon fiber plate in it, which is really interesting. Which is even more interesting because when you run, you actually don't feel it being that stiff. You just feel, like you've said, that kind of rocker, or that kind of spring-like motion. And I mean, our when we discussed it, I guess the main of the cushioning will actually go in the heel portion of your shoe, right? So in that 32 or 42 millimeters that you have in the back, that's where you have the greatest amount of the foam and the cushioning. And if you actually look at this shoe construction, that's where the plate starts, and then it curves downwards towards the midfoot and then toward the forefoot to kind of give you that spring-like. So if you think about the spring, if you hold it at the front part, it's almost like a springboard, right? If you go to the pool and you jump on the springboard, if you jump on the springboard in the middle of it, you're not gonna get that much bounce, yeah. But if you go really at the end of it, that's when you'll get the most rebound, right? So if you flip that around and feel like that rebound is where the heel is, because in essence that's where you will get the most give in the carbon fiber plate, if you want, and where there's the most cushioning. It could be that if you're rear foot, you're getting the most of that energy return or that most benefit because you're compressing in that region, and then it's propelling you. Whereas if you're hitting more in the front foot, there's less cushioning and you can less get that spring action from the springboard, or in this instance being the carbon fiber plate. So I think it's more of a mechanical construction within the shoe. And I would actually argue that it's actually going the other way around in the Vaporflies. Just a side note on that, I have heard that Nike at some stage, and I think there might have been some of the other shoe companies, looked at developing a shoe, just as you said, that had actually no heel.
That someone brought one out just like last week or so.
Yeah.
I don't know who it is. I just saw it come through on Instagram or something. I was like, what?
Yeah, so that's actually not a new idea. That was trialed and tested. I think in the lead up to the 2-hour challenge, actually. And with that assumption being that most elite runners run to the front of their foot. Okay, we're going to try to reduce as much weight as we can from the heel, and the athletes hated it because you're not always going to be consistently always on your forefoot when you're running. There'll be some variations there in terms of that loading and that variability in foot strike patterns. And they was like, that was the most stupidest idea we've ever had. And they took it away.
It's funny. I remember some of these back in the day, and I think they were geared towards, people that just wanted bigger calves. And I was actually thinking about those shoes when you were talking about how your background is in some calf muscle biomechanics, I believe.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I would say, it would be an awesome tool for developing calf muscles, because then people wouldn't go on running on their heels.
Yeah, they were just like this platform underneath your toes, kind of, and you had to like walk around like that. But I don't know if you'd really want to run with them. But yeah, they're pretty funny.
Well, that explains the heel striking thing, or rear foot, and then. Yeah. So around the individual responsiveness, like what was like the best responders? Do you remember? Like, was it like, wow, these people, like, this is dramatically faster?
Yeah, I mean, we tried to tease out a little bit and answer that question. Who would respond more favorably, and we had a few assumptions there. So that the first one was, is it the people whose shoes are most comparable to the Nike Vaporfly? So we looked at what people were used to wearing, and using the minimalist shoe index, tried to factor that in as a measure, a proxy measure of how similar their shoes were to the Nike Vaporfly, or how similar their shoes were to the flat. And would that explain how much they change in their running economy? And we didn't see any association there. Then we thought, okay, well, maybe it's how they feel in the shoe. So we had asked them, so I know this was one of the questions that you preempted me with, is using a visual analog scale to quantify your shoe. So say the comfort of your shoe. And it is a tool that has been used to look at people's perception of shoes, and has been shown valid and reliable. So we kind of use a subset of that just to see how comfortable people felt when they put on the Vaporfly or when they put on the flat, and when they were running in their own shoe, to see, okay, well, is comfort related to how well they perform in the time trial? Is it related to their economy measures? And it wasn't. And then we also tried to look at, do you feel these shoes help you perform? And their subjective rating was also not related to how well they responded to the shoe. So to answer your question, we did try to look at, a few of these different avenues to tease out, okay, who would potentially respond more favorably, and either then, the potential for the rear foot and non-rear foot strikers, we weren't able to see any perceptual measures or any relationship to what people were used to wearing. So I unfortunately can't answer that. So short of going and trying out, doing your own 3K or 5K time trial with Will's lactate measure, then it's really hard to know whether or not someone will respond favorably or not to the Nike Vaporfly. chances are you will, but it's not assured. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a good finding or non-finding, depends how you want to look at it. Of like, it isn't necessarily like, oh yeah, I think these are going to make me way faster. They're so comfy. Like now I'm going to be faster. It's like you said, like that didn't actually correlate. Like it was more so that the shoe as it was improving time and running economy, which is what they're advertising, which is what you want. And yeah, so like I guess that you've said you kind of just need to try them, right?
Yeah. At this stage, we don't have that information, unfortunately. So, we do have a more data that we've collected with the Nike Vaporfly to look at those actual changes in running biomechanics between the different footwear conditions. So we've just kind of started to explore that data as well. So I'm hoping that maybe in a few months' time, maybe you guys can, have me back on your podcast and I can tell you, oh yeah, from a biomechanical perspective, when these changes happen, then that suggests that you'll respond favorably. But at this stage, other than being a rear foot or non-rear foot strikers, I can't help you much more than that.
Yeah. What about so you're running in flats, like minimalist shoes, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Like as a biomechanist, physiotherapist, why is that? Like especially after seeing some of these results.
Yeah, so now we're going completely, from the Nike Vaporfly super technological shoes to, I run in something that has less technology possible. And I guess that's more from like I mentioned earlier on, prior to the Nike Vaporflies, the thing that was the most associated with running performance in running shoes was the weight of the shoe. So the lighter you go, so for every 100 gram of reduced shoe mass, it's about 0.7 to 1% improvement in running economy. There seems to be a plateau that, once you get to around 220 grams, anything that you take more away doesn't necessarily seem to improve your performance that much more. Which, if you actually look at the Nike Vaporfly shoe, they're at 210 gram. So in their construction, I only realized that like a few months ago. I was like, oh, yeah, but they have smart people working for Nike. So yes, and when you think about running, coming back to the calf muscle, the calf muscle is one of the most important muscles, for gait and locomotion and running. And actually by wearing, your traditional bigger bulky shoes, you're actually reducing the amount of load that your calf muscle contributes, or you're inhibiting to a certain extent the natural foot mechanics that we're kind of born with. So that was more of I wanted to go back to that kind of fundamental way of running. And I did believe that running in lighter shoes would actually make me faster. So, but then I had a baby in the meanwhile, and then things happen, and then then you get older, you don't necessarily get faster all the time. But I do actually enjoy running. It took me a while to adapt though, and that's what people forget. People think that you can transition relatively quickly, and then they get injured. It took me, I would say, a good 7 to 8 months to fully transition my running program to running in minimalist shoe. Now, I run about 80 to 100K a week, but that's how long it took me to say, I now feel like I'm comfortable enough that I don't have to worry about injuries and whatnot.
I'll cancel my order then, or it's like up in the air. But, I have limited time to cancel my order.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, running is good for you. Yeah, so fundamentally, if you want to run in Nike Vaporfly, or if you want to run in minimalist shoe, if you want to run in shoes without heels, then you go for it. If you're running, it's making you healthier and happier, so it's all good.
Well, I think that will pretty much do us for today. Like that was super interesting to get like an actual like scientific look at what's happening with these shoes, and we kind of don't know if Matt's going to buy them or not. So
to be continued.
to be continued. We're waiting on your results for this next one, so that'll be it.
And again, like one of the things that would be interesting moving forward is looking at habituation. So one of the things to consider is that these people came into the lab and, they got tested with, the racing flats and the Nike Vaporfly, but they didn't have time to, go and train for them. So I've just finished talking about, it took me 7 months to become used to running in minimal footwear and flat shoes. And I would feel comfortable now, racing a 3K, 5K, half marathon wearing racing flats. But if you put me in those 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been comfortable, doing that. So is there a learning effect, both for the racing flats and the Nike 4% shoe? So in those non-responders, maybe if you gave them a training period of times, then they might become responders because they would adapt to these new biomechanics that are new to them or novel to them because of the Nike Vaporfly. So yeah, there's not yet a training study on Vaporfly shoes, and yeah, so to be continued.
That's awesome. So if we want to, keep in touch with you, like follow along, it looks like you're quite active on Twitter. And where else? Like how can we follow what you're up to?
Yeah, so Twitter is a pretty good place. You can also just check out my research on my university webpage. And if you're just interested in what I'm doing, just, flick me an email and look for some, collaboration, and always happy to have a chat. So
that's cool. I'll link to all those in the show notes. Otherwise, we'll let you go off and enjoy your day.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Kim. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Performance Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed that episode, check out our other episodes. Share it with a friend. It really helps us out and increases the reach of what we do. Thanks, and we'll catch you next time.
See ya.